And I remember you said it like this one day where I got in my car and I was like, that's what I don't effing want.
Wow.
I don't want to drive this train.
Mm.
And I am sick of being the conductor in not only our professional life at that time, but at our personal side. But I was like, who do I talk to about this?
Right. Hello and welcome to the Weaponized Marriage Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Hewitt.
And I'm your host, Kendra Hewitt.
And today's topic that we're going to share today is why you must invest in your marriage. Kendra really wanted to talk about this for our first episode. We both personally feel like this has been the game changer for us. And, somebody who I like to use analogies of physical fitness because I definitely have spent a lot of energy in the world of fitness and health, being a chiropractor, being a competitive athlete. And the way I view this is like, if I'm going to set a program of how to put like 5 pounds of muscle on my frame, like how am I going to reverse engineer that? So like end of the year, here I am, 205 pounds, 8% body fat. And here I am today, I'm 198 pounds, like 10% body fat. How am I going to get to that? So, I'd game plan that. I'd reverse engineer it into like, probably like thirds, right? So like sort of 90-day efforts with my nutrition and my programming, progressive overload, blah, blah, blah. Right. Now I figured out how to do this very well, like with my physical health and with events that I would sign up for. But what I never realized is that like, that is the exact same approach that you need to use when you're attacking any other area in your life, whether it's business, which is why with my team, we do visionary meetings. We do one in the beginning of the year, or a big one that vision casts for the whole year. And then we do quarterly visionary meetings as well. And the game changer for us was doing that in our marriage. But we didn't start doing that. I mean, it's only been a couple of years.
Yeah. I feel like it was even like a couple of years ago. I can remember the day so clearly where I was like, dude, we need to either get a therapist or like, I don't know where this is going.
Yeah.
And we had no experience at that point with any couples therapy.
No, nothing. We never had couples therapy. We didn't like
even individual therapy. We didn't have a lot of experience with.
No. And I think I spoke about Wake Up Warrior, and what this really taught me was structure of how to game plan my life, right? Because I knew how to do that with my fitness. It really taught me how to do that well in my business, but also like my month and my week. Because it was like, okay, well, I'll set this yearly target. And then it's kind of like a resolution. Like after the first month, it's like, you forget, or you don't even look at it.
And I think that like, it's like, there's different levels of going in, the pool, right? Like, I think that like planning date nights was the beginning of your putting your toe in the water, right? Which was huge because most of our marriage, if we went on a date, it was like, we would get in the car and you'd be like, what do you feel like eating? And I would make 3 suggestions and you'd be like, I'm not eating that.
And guys, if you're playing that game, here's a tip. Just ask your wife, hey, guess where we're going tonight? And the first place they guess, just take them there. You're right. Don't do that. I'm kidding.
That is a good tip. I didn't know that.
But yeah, it was like such a clusterfuck. It was like, I did no planning. I didn't know like, hey, I'm going to plan this vacation for my wife and I. Well, part of that problem too, is I just felt helpless in my finances though. I felt like I had no plan in my finances. So I was like, well, am I going to just stick it on a credit card? Like, are we going to run it through the business? I didn't even know like how we were writing things off at that time. I just had my head in the sand about so much shit. So because I told myself the story, like, I don't know my finances, so I can't plan ahead and pay for vacations.
No, I think you told the story at that point is like, I make all the money. That's what happened.
Yeah.
And you were probably. And you were like, isn't that enough? That was your attitude.
For sure. I think a lot of guys think that way. I know a lot of guys think that way. It's like, I produce, like I make the money. So my wife should love and appreciate me because of that. So she should fuck me. She should like, show up and be happy to see me. Except that's not.
Keep going.
Yeah. That's not
one of the other roles that you had.
Well, I think, but the funny thing is like, I'm operating this way without even knowing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't consider myself like some sort of like Archie Bunker, like dude, like in his, wife beater saying like, now. Hey, give me my dinner, woman. Like that was never me. Like I always contributed and wanted to like make sure that like, hey, I like clean homes too, and to clean up and to participate and whatever, like mow the lawn and all that stuff. It's not like I was doing nothing, but I think that I was telling the story that like, aren't I enough? Isn't what I'm doing enough? Mm-hmm. Right. But then of course, the problem behind the scenes is like, well, secretly Kendra's like, why don't you fucking plan anything? Right. Mm-hmm. Why don't you take me out and on a nice date that you planned for and paid for? And
like, I don't want to get in the car and you be like, where do you want to go?
And put some thought into it. Well, never mind a vacation, just even like a date night. So yeah, one of the first game changers, like guys, if you're just totally lost, like the very minimal thing you can do is just like plan a date night. That's it. It's very simple.
And it doesn't have to be an expensive one. It's the effort. I remember someone told a story a couple weeks ago about how they never realized this, but they realized that their wife would go to the store and buy herself flowers when they had extra money. And this was when they were more broke. Like they didn't have a lot of money at that time.
Right.
But like once a month, she would go pick herself out flowers. And then now fast forward, they owned a company, fast forward, and money is not a problem for them anymore. Right. And about how he put two and two together and he started buying her flowers. And he started he went to the store and he like befriended the florist. Mm-hmm. And he was like, she likes these colors. And he started like, the florist like started introducing him to all these different types of flowers. And so every week, just for no reason at all, he started sending his wife flowers. Mm-hmm. And then he figured out that the florist knew him now and that he could just automate every Thursday that the florist at the store would pick out new flowers and send it to her. So like every Thursday at 5:00, she got flowers.
Yeah. How'd that work out?
And she stopped like appreciating the effort.
Right. Because there's no effort.
So finally, he confronted her and he was like, I know you love flowers. Like, what's the deal? And she's like, it's the effort that counts. I know that your assistant or someone is ordering these for you.
That's such a guy thing to do, though, is like, oh, this is what she wants. So I'm just going to automate it and make sure it happens.
Well, you turn it into like kind of like a business.
Yeah, like, because it's just like, oh, this is what she wants. This is what I'm going to make sure happens. And then you automate it.
Yeah. And you become transactional in your relationship, right? So I think you should tell a little bit of story about like where you came from in terms of your family and about how like the really pivotal moment was like when I was like, you're just being like, and you were like, I go to work, I make the money, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, do you want to be a stay-at-home dad?
No, I said, do you want me to be a stay-at-home
dad? Yeah. And I got really mad.
You freaked out.
So, but tell that story a little bit, because I think that's really powerful, because I think I saw it sometimes before you, but again, we weren't in a place where we could communicate, where I could really tell you how I felt or what I was observing without you being very reactive.
Yeah. I mean, well, like a 21st century male, like obviously what's not going to work is that you just like go to work, make the money, come home, and your wife just services you. Like that might've been sort of,
my God, I can't even like,
right?
Like
that might've been like old school guy. But the thing is like, no woman really wants that. I don't think ever really wanted that, but it just turned into this gender role thing. Right. Mm-hmm. And here's the thing is like, that never even results into this like deep, like intimate emotional connection that I think everyone desires in their heart. But I think they just forget is even possible after a while, once you just like get into the rigors of life and your life happens. I mean, in my family, I come from a family of 4 boys, and my parents married young. My mom was 18. My dad was 20. So like life hit them fast, and then they just go on survival mode. Right. Mm-hmm. And so my dad would work his ass off, and my mom he'd come home, and my mom would be like, with 4 boys all day, be like, what the fuck? Like what's going, like, do this, like show up and do this and that. And he'd be like, what the fuck? I just would like work my sack off for like 14 hours. And yeah, I just watched this over and over. So it was always like fights about money, fights about like who's doing what.
It was just never enough.
Yeah. So that's the story. It's just like, oh, well, it's never enough. Right. And I think that like, that's what I observed. And the thing is, what we don't realize is like, even if you know it or not, like you take on that environment you were raised in. It's not genetic. It's like you're a product of your environment. And if you don't have consciousness around, like, you haven't asked yourself the questions of like, well, why do I think this way? Why do I believe this? Why am I? And it requires you to put up that mirror in front of you and look at and be really honest. It's all about truth. Like if you're very truthful and honest, it's like, why do I think this way? Why don't I think that, like, my wife's saying this and she wants this, like, why am I so resistant to it? And, for me, it was just all the stories that I had in my brain that I didn't think were problems. Right. But obviously, like, the way I was operating wasn't going to end up into what I really wanted. So there was like a huge rub. Right. And
it's a gap.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, Kendra wouldn't say to me, like, this is what I want you to do. This is how I want you to operate. This is where you're going to need to step up.
Okay. So this is where I think most women relate, though. It's like, we are not encouraged nor really taught. Most of us don't have a role model of like a woman being like, this is what I want. I know where I came from too, is that like, I always wanted to make sure I didn't come up off of as ungrateful or like appreciation is really important to me, like you feeling appreciated and in return to me too. And I think that what happened is that I would feel like very underappreciated for the things that I did do. And you especially you got so much better now, but you would really look for the things that I didn't do.
Yeah. Well, that's my nature too. As a doctor, I'm looking for problems all the time. So, and that was something I've really had to like work the muscle of gratitude and appreciation, because to me, it was not natural. That's not a natural default to me. Like, some people are just such grateful people. Like, they're just appreciative. You almost see it on their face. And like, that's not me. Or wasn't me.
And well, I think your story that really led you, and I think there's probably a lot of guys that can relate to this. I feel like there's going to be a lot of women, hopefully, that will relate to this, is that I think part of your story is just like you said, is like, I look for problems, right? But then the problem is that you were married to a woman who loved to solve problems to a fault at point. Like,
yeah, you're a giver.
Yeah. So it became this really imbalanced where it felt to me like you were always taking and never giving anything in return. But I felt super guilt and shame about that, because I grew up where my mom was a single mom. My dad passed away very suddenly when I was 12 years old. And I remember that critical relationship of my mom and dad. And my dad was a fireman, but then they flipped houses, and they used to buy like shitty houses, and we would move into it and we would live in it while we did all the work. Which if you rehabbed a house together, you can basically do anything. But like by the time I was 7 or 8, I think I'd lived in 10 houses. Like we would, they would move in, fix it, flip it. And it was interesting because I always kind of saw the side of my mom and dad where they worked really well together. But I know that they fought a lot in private that they never showed us. And I also know my dad really honored and worshiped my mom in so many ways. He was like an only child. His parents both died really, really young too. And my mom had both her parents who were literally became my caretaker. And talk about like a 1930s, 40s, 50s relationship. That was my grandma and my grandfather. My grandfather, my old school Italian, would sit in his chair, and I literally, and I loved him for so many things. He was generous. He was so generous. I loved it. But the way that he expressed his love is he bought it. He would buy you random gifts or like whatever.
And that's how he would invest.
That's how he would invest in you. But like he would, like, I remember this story my mom told me that my mom was in a beauty pageant. She was 19 years old, and it was the first time he ever told her she was beautiful at 19 years old. And the first time he ever told her that he was proud of her and he loved her. And my mom was a ridiculously very forward female in terms of very smart. She wanted to be a doctor. She went to school to be a chemist when women weren't in chemistry. And I just think about but I modeled my grandmother's relationship more than I was able to model my mom and dad's, because my dad wasn't there.
Yeah. So bring it back to our marriage and so what you're getting to is like the way you would look at investing in our marriage, or like be married to me, was like, I'm going to help Ryan.
I would always do acts of service. Like I would always
right?
like have like, I would make sure like you had food and meals and all the kind, like constantly.
And the thing is, like, although it's like, oh, that's great. Like I did appreciate it, but I wouldn't show it the way you wanted me to. But the thing is, that's not how I wanted you to love me.
Yeah.
So in this, like, one of the things that we've invested in our marriage which has been really powerful for us, and like literally has taken 10 years to really figure it out, is that like the 5 love languages. It's a massive, massive game changer for anyone who wants to stay married. like Kendra's love language is acts of service. She want like quality time, acts of service. For me, I'm a physical touch. Like I'm a dude. Like tell me, touch me, fuck me. That's my, like, you got me right there.
Yeah.
You could stay, like you could do anything else. But like what would happen is that Kendra would feel unappreciated because I wouldn't acknowledge the things that she did for me. And she did like fucking everything. You basically ran the businesses, like ran the household, all while I was like working and CrossFitting, and you just built resentment over time because of that. But the thing is, it's like, I didn't really understand. I didn't know that you were building this resentment against me. And then my story is like, well, you felt disconnected from me. So you're like not touching me the way I want you to touch me. You're not having sex with me and connecting with me, like in my heart. And like, you know what I'm saying? Like we were having occasional sex, like, but it was transactional. Yeah. Like Garrett says, it's like vaginal masturbation. So it's like,
or was it was another item on my already long to-do list at that point. And
how many guys like having sex with their wife who's like basically like an unwilling participant, and it's like, all right, let's get this over with. Like I hate that.
We know, right?
So, well, who likes that? I mean, there's no one who likes having sex with someone who, like,
okay, don't get sidetracked,
wants it over with. Anyways, but I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. It's real. And the thing was that it's not like Kendra didn't think like, oh, Ryan isn't like good looking. Like, oh, he has to work on his body a little more.
Even though that's what you thought.
Yeah, because otherwise, why wouldn't you be like touching or fucking me the way I want you to?
Yeah.
And what I'm telling myself is like, oh, Kendra's not attracted to me. But the truth was, like, Ryan wasn't seeing the signs that like, hey, you're basically using your wife as a shield. You're making her take care of all of the things that a man in her mind and her heart is supposed to take care of, right? Which is like, hey, you should probably know about what we're paying for with our overhead and our taxes, and what kind of insurances do we need, and what bills are we paying? What do our credit card statements say? Like stepping up in ways that she's just totally servicing, like, oh, I'm going to help Ryan.
Yeah.
Right. But what this did is it just built a whole bunch of resentment in our marriage.
Well, and I also think that me running all the money was my control mechanism, because that's how the trauma of losing my dad affected me. Right. Well. Meaning that when my dad died, he left my mom in a really bad position. They had lost a house to bankruptcy. We had moved into another house that he had not finished yet. I'll never forget. I tell this story, like, I've told this story a lot recently, so I don't know why it keeps coming up for me, but it's like, we moved into this one house. They were growing pot in the basement, but it was in this unbelievable location.
Who was growing pot?
The people that lived there before.
It
was like a grow operation. No. Definitely not my parents. And the house basically it was a tear down. It was a bank REO property that my mom had as a listing. And when my mom drove me to the property and said, this is our next house, Mark and my brother and I just sat in the car and we just bawled. We're like, we can't live here. And it had lime green cabinets. And I remember going into the kitchen and my dad said, don't worry, this will be gone soon. Well, he told a half truth. he basically, my mom went to do an open house because she's transferred from chemistry to real estate sales. And when she went to do an open house, and he got super frustrated and pulled all the cabinets off the walls and the countertops and came home, and we didn't have a dumpster or anything like that. And my mom's like, where's the cabinets? And she made him drive down to Home Depot and buy industrial shelving like you would put in your garage. And we lived with our cabinets as industrial Home Depot shelving for probably 4 or 5 years with our, no, not probably 4 or 5, not 4 or 5 years, 4 or 5 months.
Yeah.
And I remember it was probably the one time that they let me see an argument, because my mom was like, why did you do this? We don't have the money to put cabinets back. And it just made me really start to realize that, like, that me loving you the way that I wanted to be loved, like, just wasn't working, but I didn't really know how to like click the switch to shift into a gear where I could do that. And I think, like, if you're a couple and you're listening, like, the 5 love languages, that I was going to say that too. I was surprised you went right there, is like such an easy place to start.
Yeah. It's a book, right?
But I remember when you asked me, like, how do you like to be loved?
Yeah.
I didn't know how to tell you.
Well, what I remember distinctly, you would say, and a long time ago, you're like, I just feel like all you're doing is withdrawing from my account and without making deposits. I'm like, deposits. I'm like, I fucking do this. I do this. I do this. I do this. And that was my story. It's like, oh, I make money. I work hard. You know, I look good, and all the stuff that you're like, that's not
one of the things that stands out when I think about that too, is that I remember being in the office. This is when I worked physically in the office a lot. And you used to introduce me to patients, or I would even introduce myself, and I would say, I'm Dr. Ryan's wife. And then you would kind of say it as a joke. And one day I realized, I was like, that's not fucking funny.
What?
Which was, you would say, she drives the train and I shovel the coal.
Yeah.
And I remember you said it like this one day where I got in my car and I was like, that's what I don't effing want.
Wow.
I don't want to drive this train. And I am sick of being the conductor in not only our professional life at that time, but at our personal side. But I was like, who do I talk to about this?
Right.
And I think at that point, a lot of my female friends, and definitely my mom, was like kind of showing me, like holding up the mirror for me. But I wasn't willing to like look in the mirror.
Yeah, because it was pain.
Because it was painful. Because I was like, or like, I didn't know what was the next step I take to kind of start to shift, like change the direction of the train, where I don't need to necessarily shovel the coal, but like maybe I could be a little bit like a passenger and enjoy the ride instead.
Yeah, and I think, well, everyone has a different dynamic in their marriage, and like our dynamic is unique, I think, because like you're a very powerful woman. Like you're not a passive person. You're not someone who's like stay-at-home mom, I would say. Like that's not your, and I think that's fantastic for anyone who's like, I just want to take care of my kids and make sure that they like have an amazing life.
Because that's definitely a harder job.
Oh my God, it's way harder. It's insane. 2 hours with Lily, I'm like, okay, someone take over. And I love my daughter to death.
I remember when you first started spending time with Lily, and I'd be like gone for an hour and a half, and you'd be like, when are you coming home again? You would text me and I'd be like, see?
But what I'm saying is like our dynamic's unique in that, like, I think by default, I let you drive the train, right? Because I was like, oh, Kendra will take care of it. Like, cause I just trusted you so much to do the right thing. And like, I guess just like move the train in the right direction. Right. Yeah. But like you said, it's like, that's not how you want your man to lead. And I don't think any woman wants her man to like sit by passively and like, oh babe, you make it happen. I'll just stay in the background and just kind of like support you. Like if you want a polarizing marriage where you're like, you have masculine and feminine energy, then you have to step up as a man and you have to like show up, not just like producing, like that's just one element of it. Like, listen, if I was like laying on the couch, not producing, you wouldn't be with me. Okay. Let's be real. So that's a part of it, but also it's like, hey, I want you to pay attention to my needs. And for you, it's like, hey, what did you do last week that was an act of service for me? What did you do last week where you thought of me and you did something that was thoughtful that I would appreciate, or that you showed me that you love me in the way that I want to be loved.
And we started super simple. Like I was like, you know what I would appreciate? I would like, can you make my coffee for me in the morning instead of like, and you were like, that's it. I was like, that's all I got right now.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk tactical. Like number one is like schedule and plan a date. Okay. As a guy, schedule and plan a date for your wife.
And it doesn't have to be every week. Just start small.
Yeah.
It can, if it is every week, it's awesome. But like,
yeah. And number two, like just small deposits make a big difference. Like it may not be your wife's like primary love language. Like if you're lucky, your wife's love language is physical touch. Because that one is a little easier and more like you can understand that one a little more. The acts of service one is a little more like, well, is making a cup of coffee count, right? Does if I make dinner tonight, does that count? Just thinking of little creative ways that, I mean, even just writing a note, or just,
I think one of the big shifts
doing a video
is like,
on your phone
is just like asking your significant other, like,
yeah, that doesn't always work.
But
hey, babe, what's an act of service?
No, not that way.
That doesn't work.
What's something how you frame it's everything, right?
Yeah.
So like, what's something I can take off your plate this week?
There you go.
And here's the thing. Most women, when you ask that question, if you have not done that, if this is the first time you've ever asked her that, she's going to look at you like a deer in headlights.
Yeah.
Because she's going to be like, what happened to you?
Right.
Right? Like she's going to be like, what, like, I love this. Our therapist jokes all the time. He's like, if I dress up nice, his wife's like, who are you sleeping with?
Yeah. Who are you going on a date now?
Yeah. So it's just like, but you've got to come into that being like respectful that like, if you start to do something a little bit differently with a beginner's mind, it might be irking.
Yeah, but don't give up.
But keep at it. Yeah. Like just because you do one deposit. Oh, and that's another one that like really gets me. It's like, hey, I took you on date night. Now, like, I expect this, and this. And it's like at the beginning, our date nights were like that, right? Where it was like, I didn't really look forward for a date night all the time because it was like, it came with like all these expectations that followed it. So it's like making sure that you get really centered with like coming from a real place of intention. Of like, hey, expect that your wife might not know how to articulate what that looks like at this, but keep asking, just like you said. I think it's good.
Yeah. So schedule a date and plan. Number two is like, during the week, think of, ask your wife or whatnot, like, what can I do to take something off your plate, or just do something thoughtful every week? What's another way that was a game changer for you, like as an investment in our marriage?
I mean, I think when we really matched schedules and we started to be like, okay, on Mondays and Wednesdays, you bring Lily to school. And then I was like, I know now that that's consistent. So I can go plan to do something else instead of
freeing you up.
Freeing me up has been a huge thing. And I think, people, men and women, are so overscheduled at this point that they really need that.
Right.
So like, how can you free each other up? I just listened to another couple, really awesome couple, do a podcast the other day, and she was talking about how they put their schedules up, and then if she sees that like his schedule's like really slammed, she's like, how can I help you on this schedule? And like he does simple things, like he'll say like, on this day, since I'm traveling, can you walk the dog so I can go to the gym? And she's like, yeah, sure.
Yeah. So it's communication.
It's just like the communication and actually like looking it at together, because I think, like I said, just back to losing my dad when I was a kid, is that I started controlling the money because for me, I was worried that I wouldn't know like where it was based on the situation and how that trauma affected me. And now, like I said, we're it's always work in progress. We're working on it, but like now we can have financial conversations with real data and not arguments as much more infrequently. But I think that just like really taking baby steps, like a huge one for us was starting couples therapy. Now that's not in the works for every person at times. That's part of the reason I think that we wanted to start this podcast, because now we can have this dynamic where we can talk about some of the things that we work through with couples therapy. But one of the things I think that was been game changer just for us in terms of the couples therapy is that like we meet every Tuesday at 4:00 and it's basically a date.
Yeah.
And it's a forced time. At the beginning, it was really forced, right? Where we both showed up. Some days one of us showed up and we were like ready to go. And other days we were like,
well, and say, what happened?
Yeah.
No, what happened? You said, get this couples that we need couples therapy. You better find a therapist and schedule it, or we're not going to make it. We're getting a divorce.
Yeah.
That was literally the conversation. That was only 2 years ago.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And at the beginning, we did couples therapy before we went out on date night. I don't think I recommend that. Because there was a couple date nights that just went real sideways. But I think it's so much more than, like I said, than date night, right? But that's a great place to start.
Well, I mean, there are investments in your marriage. So we talked about, first of all, planning and scheduling a date night. Number 2, thinking about ways that you can just have micro acts of service into your spouse's life.
Mm-hmm.
Number 3 is communication, right? So making sure that you have specific times where you communicate. So for us, being in business together, we have a business meeting every week and we try to have a personal meeting every week. And we're not that one we're working on really.
That one we're really focusing on now.
But the one we're very committed to is our therapy call once a week with our therapist, which is, I mean, it has been absolutely a game changer.
I hope we get him on here as a guest one day.
We will. Stephen's been an absolute godsend for us. In many ways, I think that he just really helped us realize, I think Kendra, it really helped as a male therapist too. It helped Kendra really see things from my perspective, because listen, if you're married, your spouse isn't always going to believe you and is not going to see it your way. But if they have confirmation from somebody that they know and trust, that's like, oh, okay, I see now, that is something that you're right. This is how I'm saying this and the way I'm being. And this is sort of the pivot that I'm going to make. And same thing with me, it helped. So one thing that our therapist is really good at is he knows both of our personality types, and he uses something called the Enneagram, which there's a ton of different personality profilings out there, but we really like the Enneagram, and both Kendra and I have studied it and know our Enneagram number. And Stephen uses that almost exclusively with all his clients. So he knows your nature and who you are at your core. So he knows Kendra as a 6, here's the way that you operate. And Ryan as a 3, this is the way that you operate. You're a heart type. You're a driver, go-getter. And Kendra's just trying to keep up. And, Kendra is always looking for threats and always looking for the safety and how are we going to do this properly, and sort of critical in the way that we do things, which can work really beautifully together, but it can also work really negatively.
Really repel you.
Yeah, really negatively if you're not careful. So he's really helped us based on our personalities, how to connect.
And that's another great example of just a small investment of taking the Enneagram test and starting to be and how I suggest, if you want to do that, you do it yourself. And then you say hey, I learned so much about myself by looking at this, because the other person might not be into anything like that. Right. So there might be some resistance. So kind of just, I think stuff like that, those are, I consider investments. And I think we would we should also end it too, is that one of the greatest things too is that I think that we did this year is we took a couples only vacation. So our daughter's 4. And it was the first time, I was just sharing the story with our other friend, Jason, the other day, is that it was the first time ever that Ryan planned everything and I showed up. And we had a very different vacation experience.
Yeah, I had lots of sex on that vacation.
Well, your love language.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
but
I mean, you didn't have to think or worry about anything. You just showed up and just hey, just let's have fun and just, feel beautiful and let's get some sun.
But what made me think about that is you said you're a heart type, which you are, and I'm a head type. My number is in the head. Yeah. So my constant challenge that I have to always be aware of is that I like to go here and be in my head and think everything through instead of feel it. Right. So I'm always trying to come from my head into my heart, and Ryan's a little the opposite. Right. So he is much more free flowing with like the feelings, and the feelings sometimes they stop you, right?
Mhm.
Like they get in the way.
Mhm.
So just kind of knowing that, but the reason I bring up the vacation was like, that's not always in the cards for everybody, is like to have a couple's vacation, but like you can have some fun with it, like make it a staycation locally where
Yeah.
you like take your significant other for a overnight, or
Mhm.
like even like, I mean, tap your, people that are local family that can like take your kids so you can actually get out of your environment. Cause I
Yeah.
think that that's really a huge way to invest in your marriage. And if we talk about vacations in the past,
Mhm.
like vacations in the past where I planned them, I paid for everything, I organized everything. If anything went wrong, I would be in such a horrible place because I'd be like, fuck, I spent all this time and I fucked this up, like, and I had a hard time getting out of my head
Mm.
in any vacation, especially when we owned a business and we didn't have people working for us, which
Mm.
means we actually paid double because we had to close our business. Now we don't have to do
Yeah.
that.
We didn't make money. We were spending money, and
We
we're
weren't
losing,
connected.
and we're losing
And
money.
we weren't connected. Like,
Yeah.
and it was painful to go on vacation, right? Because I was like, oh man, he's gonna want this, 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 and this. And I'm just like still in my head about like, did I lock the door at the office? And did, like all this weird stuff. But I think just like starting small with the investment is the place that you need to start.
We'll end it there then.
Okay.
That sound good?
Yeah.
Cool. So, anyways, so I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of investing in your marriage. Please share the episode, rate it if you would be so kind. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you on more episodes.
Subscribe.
And subscribe, right? Thank you. All right. See you guys next time.